You're listening to the Rainmaking Podcast, hosted by high-stakes headhunter, author, and professional speaker, Scott Love.
You're listening to the Rainmaking Podcast, and my name is Scott Love. Thanks for joining me on the show. Before I tell you about our guest and our topic today, let me tell you what happened during my conversation with him. I had a problem in my business, and I was looking for resolution, and he didn't even know it. But in my mind, I was asking questions related to the issue, and he delivered. I was able to solve my problem, and he doesn't even know that. By the way, I need to tell him about that too. Our guest today is David Greer. His mission is to take his 40 years of entrepreneurial experience and share it with other entrepreneurs and rainmakers to help them accelerate their success. By the way, David's book is called Wind in Your Sails: Vital Strategies that Accelerate Your Entrepreneurial Growth. I read this book. It's an easy read, and I came away with specific, actionable ideas that made a difference in my own professional services practice, and I think it will in yours as well. Make sure you connect with David. He's got a very generous offer in his interview. I'm going to put all of his contact information on the show notes. I'm also going to put the link where you can order his book, and like I said, I'd highly recommend it. Thank you for listening to the show. As always, this show is sponsored by Leopard Solutions, legal intelligence suite of products, Firmscape, and Leopard BI. Push ahead of the pack with the power of Leopard. And now here's my conversation with my friend, David Greer. Thanks for listening. Hey, this is Scott Love with the Rainmaking Podcast. Our special guest today is David Greer, the author of Wind in Your Sails. David, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Scott. I'm really looking forward to this.
And I'm excited about this topic, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Creating an X factor to 10x your competition. And so, David, let's get some working definitions here. You talk about 10x your competition. What exactly does that mean? And why is that something we should care about as professionals who are involved in client development?
So some aspect of how you work with your company is 10 times better than how your competitors do it. For example, my background comes from business to business selling of software, and especially, larger end systems. The process change for an organization to introduce, replace an existing piece of software, if it's only 2 times better, no one cares because the cost to the organization. If you can swap it out and somehow it's plug and play compatible with what you've got, but still gives a lot of benefits, that might be a 5Xer right there, because the cost of change compared to your competitors is so low. And again, in the software B2B sales, I'd say if you're not 5X or 10X better, no one's even going to consider you, because the change management, the getting involved is just so painful that you have to be able to show that they're going to get that kind of benefit. So again, I just don't think 2X, even in consumer things, most of us won't switch. We're used to what we're doing.
Do you think it's always
better?
Yeah. Do you think it's always been like that, or has it just become hyper competitive? And now 2X is table stakes. Everybody has that. Now you got to be 5X to 10X.
I think a lot of things have become kind of commodities. And so, as some things have become commodities, then, the non-commodities have to show up better, much better. And, I think even our phones, if you are a longtime Android user, you're not really likely to switch off the Android platform because, again, the cost of change is too high, unless Apple can show you that, it's just so much better for you and what you do that it's worth the switch.
I get it. Yeah.
Right? So
that's great.
The other thing I talk about, and it's in my book, actually, 2 of the case studies in my book talk about this. People often assume it's just purely about product or about the service you're delivering. But I really encourage entrepreneurs and salespeople to look at it in the entire experience, from first interaction to learning about who you are, to closing a sale, to implementing it, to actually getting the benefit.
Right. And by the way, your book is fantastic. And I like the way that what you just said, you break it down into a systematic model that I pretty much guess can be replicated based on what you've seen.
Plan.
Yeah. I'm in sales, I'm in client development. So I naturally turned to page 79, sales strategy. But as I'm flipping back to the previous chapters, innovation strategy, marketing strategy, entrepreneur strategy, corporate strategy, I see how all those things affect the sales strategy. So let me ask you this then, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but we as entrepreneurs or as professional service providers, even though we work in an organization, it's our practice, it's our book of business. We should be looking to deliver a value that's 10x compared to our clients' current providers. That kind of our mindset.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Like great salespeople, they return calls within, a certain period of time. Yeah. Or like there's a certain amount of responsiveness, which can be very challenging when you're like in client meetings but I think as a great salesperson, your responsiveness is that will be one of the big differentiators against your competitors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what I mean. Like that's an aspect of the process where you can be a lot better than your competitors by just consciously being aware of that and, structuring your, either using a CRM system well, so that getting reminders. Okay, I've got to follow up with this person on this day, and your calendar system.
Right.
Because in that early stage, I think it's all about trust. And, you have to build that trust before you can go forward. And some of the trustworthiness is that you promise a prospect you're going to do something, and then you actually do it when you said you would do it.
Mm-hmm.
That actually engenders trust. Right? It's like, I mean, we had an agreement about what was going to happen, and then you kept up your side of the bargain.
Yeah, you gave them a thin slice. Yeah.
All of your competitors may not be good at that.
Right. So let me ask you then, and I know that you do this in your book, but if we could break our goal down into components, if we want to show 10x value to our prospects compared to what they currently have, are there certain buckets that we should put things in, certain categories or segments? How should we kind of pick it apart in terms of where we should think about improving?
Well, the first place I encourage people to think about is there a massive industry secret? And oftentimes we're too close to it, so we don't actually realize it. So in my book, I talk about Mike Jaeger and his security company, Providence Security. And it turns out that the security monitoring business has a really big secret, which is when your alarm goes off at your business or your home, nothing happens. What happens is some call center, probably in Texas or some other place, maybe offshore, they call you. Oh, Mr. Greer, your alarm is going off, which, and I might be halfway around the world. And that's actually the industry secret. And what Mike did is he founded a company on the brand promise, 5 minutes to your door, your money back.
Right.
Wow. And then he built a system that actually promised that. Like when he first did it, when I was interviewing him, he hadn't realized how long a streetlight could be. Like, oops, a minute and a half of those 5 minutes just got consumed.
Wow.
And he built like a completely automated system. So when an alarm goes off, like the appropriate closest security person that works for their firm will automatically receive a message on their phone of where to go and what to do. And this is unprecedented in the industry because that's not how the industry works. And so this is what I mean, where that's one starting point. Is there a big industry secret where you can actually expose the secret and then do something about it?
Okay, that's interesting. What are other examples that you've seen in other industries that you've consulted to?
So another one I feature in the book is Doug Bunker and Clevis Solutions. So they're a workforce mobility solution. And they specialize in co-op hydro companies, organizations, but really it has broad application. But so people are going out and working on lines, they need to get a work order. They need to be able to fill in, like when they're on site, what they're doing, what happened. And one of the big challenges at the time was that when Doug was head of sales and when he went to trade shows, no one, including Clevis, could demo like end to end how the whole system worked. And because they had built everything up on the latest kind of Microsoft platform client server, so this was like early 2000s, he was able to take a laptop that could act as a server, and he was able to take these workforce pieces of hardware, and he was able to hook them all together at the trade show. So someone standing in the booth could go in, take their mobile device, enter in like an update to the work order, and then Doug would turn to his laptop and then show, like if you were a manager, how that change showed up in the system. And at that time, no competitor could do that. No competitor at a trade show could show end-to-end interaction of the solution in the field with the solution in the office. So again, was it a specific product feature? Not per se. It was just that it was a 10x or bigger because no one else could demo at a trade show, and trade shows were your primary way that you created belief and you really started that sales process and created the leads that mattered.
That's great. So I think all of us, we should be thinking about what is that big industry secret within our industry niche that we can expose and then show how we can provide a solution around that. Is that how we would work that?
Well, that's one thing. I guess the second piece from the Clevis solution highlights to me is what is the experience of the prospect and eventual client from beginning to finish? So from first interaction to trying it, or like how they interact, to how they get quoted, to how they make a decision, to how it gets implemented, to how they actually get the value out of your service solution in the end. Like, so which part of those processes are you or your competitors really stuck on?
Right.
Like, which aspect of that really creates, a lot of challenge? And is there a way you could innovate or change or think differently or behave differently or do things differently vis-a-vis yourself and your competitors that breaks open like one of the log jams in that process?
Yeah.
Or gives a completely different experience.
So let me ask you this, and I know we might be kind of going deep just in this first variable that we're talking about. Do you think that we can even see it? Are we even too close to it? Do we know which questions to ask ourselves to find that variable that's a big secret? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Sometimes it's a lot easier to bring an outsider who can work with that. I will say, a lot of my work is with entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs tend to get very buried in the business, and they can never see it when they're responding to the next email, responding to the next quote, responding to the next client close. They have to, what I call work on the business, was take a giant step backwards and like see the bigger picture, see what's going on and do the strategic thinking. My belief is that if you really want to grow your business as an entrepreneur or as a sales leader, you need to spend a certain significant amount of the best time you have every week thinking strategically.
Yeah.
And like, I coach entrepreneurs, like, where's the best hour of your day, and put that in your calendar and focus on like the strategic goals that I've helped you create for the company.
Yeah.
And like move those ahead, right? Maybe before you answer the first email, before you take the first phone call.
How about that?
It's always a real behavior change, but like, that's where the leverage is. The leverage is actually working on the key, most strategic aspects of what you're trying to develop. I mean, first of all, you have to do some work to decide what it is, which is, again, that stepping back and figuring that out. I'm also a facilitator. I facilitate strategic planning. That's a lot of what I help entrepreneurs and their teams come up with.
Yeah. Well, this is good. I mean, this is just the first one, right?
Yeah.
And so tell me, what are some other variables that we really need to look at if we want to 10x this?
Again, I think you have to look at, your market space, what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and what you are really, really good at. And like that Venn diagram and that kind of circle in the middle, that's where you need to focus a lot of your time and attention.
That's great. And,
I do a lot of work in marketing as well. And, marketing is about positioning yourself, but you can't position yourself against a vacuum.
Yeah.
You still need to know who your competitors are, because your prospects will figure it out, your clients will figure it out. And then you have to know, again, you have to contrast and compare to something. So it's partly the 10xing is, what am I 10xing against? So some of it is becoming more aware of, what is it out there that other people are seeing?
Right. Are there any pitfalls that people fall into as they're trying to go through this process?
I think we give up too easily on like the 2x. I'm twice as good, so that's good enough.
Yeah.
I think it's really challenging ourselves to at least get to that 5x. Like, what does 5 times better look like in this marketplace around this pain point. And sometimes you might even be doing a lot of it. It's just you got to tell people more and you got to show them, right? Like my rule of thumb in sales and marketing is don't tell, show, right? Just show, demonstrate, right? And then people will figure it out.
So give me an example of that. What have you seen with somebody that you worked with where they were able to show a prospect what you're talking about and it resulted favorably for them?
So I'll take another one. So this 10X idea comes from a guy, Vern Harnish.
Yep.
It's got a couple books. And Vern talks about, again, we're probably talking 20, 25 years ago, but there was an Australian lawn care company. And again, it was the sales process was the 10X factor. So at that time, if you quoted to lawn care for someone, you had to book an appointment with the homeowner. You had to send someone out. They took one of those rolling tapes and they went and they measured the whole property. And then they went back to the office and they computed how much square feet it was and, came up with a quote, and that process might take 3 weeks. Their 10X insight was at that time, the city they were in was starting to do detailed aerial photography of the city, which many municipalities do. And with that, looking at an aerial view of a homeowner's property while they were on the phone, they were able to get a fairly accurate measure of the lawn. And it wasn't always perfect because they might not see some obstacles or some things that were going to take more time. But they decided that was worth the risk. So they actually used that aerial photography to do the estimate and gave it to the person over the phone. And they closed like 10 times more sales because it was immediate.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's just it's an industry where this is the way we've always done it. And they were just innovative and creative about, actually, there is a different way we could do it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like this is something that can apply to everybody.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
We get stuck in our ways. We get set in how we do things. And I encourage listeners to really think through that whole process from delivery to how you show up, to how the stories you tell, to look for opportunities to, again, show up in a way that, you may already be, or you're just not showing people that you're 10 times better than them.
Right. So tell me tell me a story then of somebody that you've worked with, someone that you've coached, whether it's an entrepreneur or a high-level sales professional. You don't have to mention their name, of course. But what was their situation when they came to you? What was the advice you gave them? What did they do? What was a major inflection point where it really started taking off and really accomplishing the goal? And what was kind of the end result? Can you kind of give us that arc, David?
Yeah, a simple one is a longtime client of mine, two young guys who in high school started a t-shirt printing business. And now they've built it into a Canada-wide multi-million-dollar business with two production facilities, one in Vancouver, one in Toronto.
Wow.
And they're still really young guys. Because we're a decade and maybe just a little decade and a tiny bit from when they started the business. They are just fanatical about their quality. Fanatical. And they've built relationships with all the top brands of garments. So Nike, like anyone you can think of, high-end. And I really challenged them on what they were charging. Like they were charging what the low-cost, low-quality competitors charge. And I really challenged them on that. And I think on their top products, they did a 20% price increase and absolutely no change in volume. No pushback from any of the prospects. And obviously much better top line. And there was no incremental cost doing this.
Yeah, right.
I just had to change the website. So, profits increased proportionally to the new prices. And, that was money that was just there for them because they already did all this. Like they're way better at quality than their competitors. They're way better at customer service than their competitors.
Right.
Like, so again, it's like they were doing all these things that made them at least 4 or 5 times better than their competitors. And they weren't charging an appropriate charge for the value I think that they were delivering.
So do you think, was there anything where they had a big industry secret that they exposed or anything like that? Was there anything that they did that really kind of moved the needle in terms of getting the results they wanted to?
No, I don't think. I mean, the other thing was they have opened up 2 production facilities so they can be closer to the client and reduce shipping costs for their clients. I mean, it was a major decision to do that, and probably one of the few t-shirt printing businesses in Canada that have dual locations.
Yeah.
And they're still exploring how they can exploit that to give them a higher competitive advantage.
Got it. Okay, good, good. And so tell us then, if people can take the ideas that you've mentioned and they're going to start working on this, they really want to 10x it. And if you could put it in 3 action steps, what would those 3 action steps be, David?
The first action step is you have to slow down, stop what you're usually doing, and step back and look at this. So nothing will happen if you don't take that action. The second is I would ask you to really consider somehow involving someone else, maybe even someone outside of your business. And maybe you don't even pay for it. Maybe it's just a mentor you can find or an expert in the industry who can be a sounding board, who can help you gain bigger perspective on where you fit and what your competitors are doing.
Yep.
And then the third action is to really understand end to end how people find you, interact with you, become prospects for you, how you actually sell and deliver, and anything you can glean from your competitors about that process.
Got it. Okay, good. And let me ask you about some of these. I had some other questions for you. Let's say somebody's listening to this and they want to really do some work. And they take number 1, they're going to slow down, they're stop what they're doing, and they're going to step back and they're going to look at this. What do you think they should do? Should they look at their internal protocols? Should they look at their customer lists? Where do you think they should really start in stopping what they're doing and looking at what their business is?
I would start with, what have you got internally vis-a-vis your competitors? What documentation do you have? What do you know about your competitors? What do you don't know? I'd probably start there, because again, it's this whole idea you can't be 10x your competitors if you don't know who your competitors are and what they're doing. So I'd start with the outside piece, and then trying to understand where you can gain some insights from that, to then work on the internal piece as to where you can start to make that biggest difference. The other thing I do as a coach is trying to remind everyone that, in my opinion, everything is an experiment.
Yeah.
So go even if you start really small, try some experiments. And I don't see if experiments don't succeed or fail. I mean, they do. You have a theory. If we do this, we'll get more prospects, or we'll get more leads, or they'll be higher value. But if you come out of that and it turns out your thesis was wrong, so you didn't get the outcome you were hoping for, it's just learning. It's okay, now I know more than I did before. So what's the next experiment I need to take? And just keep experimenting. I think this is the thing we lose, is that we stop experimenting. We stop trying new things. We just assume that what we're doing is perfect. And this level of kind of introspection, challenging ourselves, how could we do things better or different? And what experiments could we run? My client in the t-shirt business, was very nervous the sales volume was going to go way down when they increased their prices. So the experiment was increase the prices and see what happened to volume. And the answer was no change. But that's not what they were expecting. Right? I mean, in that case, the outcome was the desired outcome. But if it turned out, that the volume started to go down, well, then we would have some different discussions. We would have looked at things maybe it was too big a leap. Maybe there's still some value to be had, but it's not as much as you thought. What's the next experiment? So there are no failures. They're just they're just learning.
I think that's good. And I'd even talk with my colleagues in my own business about, let's try a different type of voicemail message. Let's test a different type of outreach and then measure it. Let's do 20 of those, and then let's see what the response is.
Exactly.
And, what I've seen in our business, in the recruiting industry, it is hyper competitive. And what used to do good work and make placements 5 years ago, it's not like that anymore in terms of how you connect with people. So you always have to be evolving. And I think what you've shared with us today, and even your book, Wind in Your Sails, I think that's a good starting point for people to buy your book and to read through it, because I really like the way you've structured it. It's easy to read. I learned things in reading your book, and I'd highly recommend that. And so that leads me to ask you this question, David. Tell us about your business. What do you have? What do you do that you think could help our listeners? And tell us a little bit about that. And we'll put all of your contact information on the show notes. Wherever anybody's listening to the podcast, go to the show notes and you'll be able to connect with David directly.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm a 40-plus year entrepreneur. And for just about the last decade, I've been an entrepreneurial coach. So I work directly with entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs and their teams, or with really high-performing individuals, often involved like in sales, who are stuck or challenged or in a crisis. And, I work with them to achieve the goals that you want in business. And after we work for a while, usually in life as well. And, I like to make it easy. It's always hard to tell whether you can work with a coach like me. So I offer a free 1-hour coaching call. So if you're stuck on something, book a call with me and we'll go through it. And, my brand promise is if you spend that hour with me, you'll have 3 ideas to accelerate your business in the next 90 days. Wow. And I've never had a failure on that brand promise so far. And to make it easy, if you just go to my website, coachdjgreer.com, that's Coach, D as in David, J as in James, Greer.com. Top left corner is my phone number and my email address on every single page. Just send me a message and let's set something up. I would love to be able to help one of your listeners over whatever challenge they're facing.
That's great, David. Thank you for that. And I appreciate your generosity of that to our listeners, and also the generosity of your time for being here and sharing your wisdom with us today. And like I said, we're going to put all of your contact info on the show notes. And I'd love to have you back on the show in the future, David. You've done a great job for us today.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rainmaking Podcast. For more information about our recruiting services for international law firms, visit our website at attorneysearchgroup.com. To inquire about having Scott speak at your next convention, conference, sales meeting, or executive retreat, visit therainmakingpodcast.com.